For decades, Gregory Peck was celebrated as the true gentleman of classic Hollywood, a man defined by elegance, discipline, and an untarnished public image. But behind that polished reputation lay a truth the world never fully understood. Long before he became a towering figure in film history, Peck was pulled into a secret that challenged the very principles people believed he stood for. A forbidden love he was never meant to experience, a decision he could never reverse, and a chapter he kept hidden until years after it had passed. When he died in 2003, an era ended with him. Yet only a handful truly knew the emotional burden he had carried throughout his life. Beneath the legendary persona was a man whose real story was far more tangled than any character he ever portrayed. It was the pain that shaped Gregory Peck into the icon the world remembers. Gregory Peck's journey didn't begin like a picture-perfect Hollywood tale. He was born on April 5, 1916, in sun-drenched San Diego, California. But behind the warm California glow was a household falling apart long before he could comprehend it. His parents were never a natural match, and by the time he reached the age of 5, he witnessed their marriage collapsing right before his eyes. His mother, Bunny Peck, tried desperately to keep the family intact. Divorce was almost unheard of in those days. Only a tiny percentage of married couples ever took that step. Yet Bunny filed for one anyway, withdrew it, then filed again, and within a few months, the separation was finalized. In his meticulously researched biography Gregory Peck, Gary Fishgall describes a home filled with tension long before the public ever suspected anything. Bunny accused her husband, known simply as Doc, of verbal abuse, violence, jealousy, and even stopping her from receiving medical care during a life-threatening burst appendix. A restraining order was issued, an astonishing move for that era, but years later, Gregory would insist that none of it ever happened. Even so, Fishgall's work suggests that at least some of her claims were likely rooted in reality. And as painful as the divorce was, what came next was even more heartbreaking. When the question of custody arose, both parents stepped back. Neither wanted to take responsibility for raising their only son that devastating moment. It was his grandmother who stepped forward and took him into her home. She became the steady, dependable presence in his life, even if history doesn't make it clear whether she was truly prepared for the role. What she did give him, however, would shape everything he would later become. Once a week, she dressed him up and took him to the movies. He watched every film on the marquee. Those shadowy theaters, filled with strangers and flickering dreams, planted the earliest seeds of his future, but not every movie outing was joyful. At 9 years old, she took him to see The Phantom of the Opera, and the terror rattled him so deeply that he slipped into her bed that night just to feel safe. Some relatives complained that he was becoming too soft, too sensitive. His parents, distant most of the time, but suddenly full of opinions, decided he needed toughening up. And just like that, his world changed again. Life with his grandmother had been gentle, predictable, and filled with Saturday afternoons at the cinema. But just as he turned 10, her health collapsed. Stomach cancer consumed her slowly, and Gregory witnessed it all from the room next door. In Michael Friedland's biography, he describes a boy lying awake at night, listening to her pain, unable to do anything. He would read to her in the mornings, offering whatever comfort he could. Years later, in an interview with Irish America, Gregory recalled the strength she carried even as she was dying, and also the haunting groans in the darkness, sounds he said he could still hear decades later. Then came the moment that changed everything. His parents arranged to send him away to a Catholic cadet school. On the day he left, he kissed his grandmother goodbye, not knowing it would be the last moment he would ever share with her. She died while he was gone, leaving him without the one person who had stepped in and chosen to love him when no one else did. With her gone, his parents could no longer remain in the background. One of them had to resume the responsibility they had once rejected. And Gregory Peck's childhood shifted once more, abruptly, painfully, and permanently. What he endured in those early years didn't just shape him. It hardened him, pushed him forward, and set him on a path that would eventually carry him far beyond the heartbreak of San Diego. And that path, unexpectedly, led toward Hollywood glory. Young Gregory Peck found himself living under his father's roof again, attending San Diego High School and inching toward adulthood one uncertain step at a time. By 1934, he transferred to a teacher's college, and this is where everything truly began to shift. The theater called to him louder than anything else in his life. He signed up for acting and public speaking classes and excelled without effort. But the academic side of teaching? That connection simply wasn't there. He felt it deep down, even if he couldn't quite admit it yet. Then came a plot twist that made little sense, not to the people around him, and certainly not in hindsight. Instead of leaning into the stage, he decided to pursue medicine. It sounded noble, respectable, but the decision was doomed from the start. He enrolled at UC Berkeley with big dreams and only $26 a year for tuition. Even that tiny fee was a mountain for a young man barely scraping by. So he went searching for work and landed a job people couldn't stop talking about. Peck became a hasher, a kitchen helper, serving food and washing dishes. But what truly stunned people wasn't the job itself. It was where he worked, inside the Gamma Phi Beta sorority house. Inside that kitchen stood this tall, broad-shouldered rower ladling soup and flipping pancakes for a room full of wide-eyed young women. His voice worked as hard as his hands, deep, smooth, warm enough to stop someone mid-sentence. And soon, that voice became impossible to ignore. One acting coach heard it and instantly recognized a spark waiting to burst into flame. That moment was the turning point, the moment Gregory Peck's true path finally came into focus. Acting wasn't just something he happened to be good at. It was what he was meant for. He left medicine behind, stepped onto the stage, and poured himself into the craft with everything he had. 5 productions in his senior year alone. Years later, he would call his time at Berkeley the greatest chapter of his life. He walked away feeling ready for the world, but the world demanded credentials, and Peck was missing one essential requirement, a final class he had never completed. Restless and stubborn, he chose not to wait. He left without a degree and headed straight for New York City. Chasing Broadway with nothing but raw talent and relentless ambition, he enrolled at the renowned neighborhood playhouse to train professionally. But while he studied among elite performers, his nights were spent in harsh realities. At his lowest point, he slept in Central Park, his tall frame curled beneath the trees, hoping the next sunrise would bring opportunity instead of another cold morning to get by. He took any job he could. At the 1939 World's Fair, he barked at crowds, using that rich voice to draw people toward attractions. He worked as a page at Rockefeller Center and guided tours through Radio City Music Hall. None of these roles were dreams. They were survival, stepping stones between auditions and hope. Then, finally, his moment arrived. Not in New York, but unexpectedly in San Francisco. A role opened in a George Bernard Shaw play, The Doctor's Dilemma, in December 1941. And suddenly, Gregory Peck was earning a real living as an actor. A roof, food, forward motion. But just 1 week into the production, the world shifted. Pearl Harbor was attacked, and the United States entered World War II. Every strong, healthy young man was expected to enlist, and with Peck's build, service seemed certain. But beneath that sturdy exterior was a secret. A devastating back injury happened during a movement class with Martha Graham. She pushed him, trying to stretch his body farther, and something in his lower back snapped, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The next morning, he couldn't walk. A ruptured disc, a displaced vertebra. Years of recovery ahead. The Army took one look and rejected him. The nation lost a soldier, but Broadway gained a leading man. With so many men overseas, theaters were desperate for actors. Peck filled the wartime vacuum with sheer force. 50 plays during those years. 3 hit Broadway. He toured, rehearsed, and performed endlessly. His career soared while the world burned, and the stage brought not only fame but a flood of romantic attention. While other men fought overseas, Peck captured the interest of the women back home. Eventually, one woman held him completely, Greta Kukkonen, a confident Finnish businesswoman, 5 years older, poised and self-assured. They married in 1942 and raised 3 sons, fiercely guarding their privacy. No magazine spreads, no public showcases. They kept their family life sealed off from Hollywood's glare. Peck was a dedicated father, but marriage required far more than devotion. It demanded patience, balance, and sacrifice. As his fame rose, tension followed, tightening around him like a rope. By the age of 34, he was overwhelmed, at one point convinced he was having a heart attack. Pills, alcohol, Pressure and constant expectations weighed heavily on him. After one explosive argument, he escaped into the Mojave Desert, spending an entire month alone in silence and self-reflection. In that stillness, he finally faced a truth he had long avoided. He could remain in the marriage for appearance's sake, for the children, but peace would never come from it. And just as the wartime shortage of men had propelled his early success on stage, it was about to push his career into an even bigger transformation. The leap that would turn Gregory Peck from a respected stage performer into something far greater, a star. The bold film that shocked everyone. In 1944, Gregory Peck made the jump that would redefine his entire life. One day he was a disciplined theater actor, and the next he was stepping into the unpredictable world of cinema. His first film, Days of Glory, was set during World War II, a war he had never served in, never trained for, never even marched through. Because of his back injury, he had been kept far from the front lines, and now he was asked to portray what he had never lived. On top of that, he was a complete beginner in film. He still carried the grand gestures and booming projection of the stage. Hollywood required something different, quieter, subtler, almost intimate. The director spent hours trying to dismantle his stage habits and rebuild him for the camera. When Days of Glory finally opened, critics were unforgiving. Reviews were harsh, and the New York Times delivered the cruelest blow, calling his performance stiff. Yet Hollywood was desperate. The war had drained the industry of male talent, and studios needed actors, even unpolished ones. And this is where Peck showed his backbone. Studio contracts at the time were chains. One studio owned you, controlled your films, your image, your future. Peck refused. Instead of surrendering to one studio, he secured non-exclusive deals with 4. Nobody did that. But he entered Hollywood as a freelancer, free to choose only the roles that offered depth, challenge, and meaning. Soon he chose a role that demanded everything from him. The Keys of the Kingdom cast him as a priest whose life unfolds across decades, aging him from his 20s to nearly 80 years old right on screen. Ambitious, risky, grueling. The film itself fell flat. Too long, too quiet, too slow for most audiences. Financially, it sank. But critics saw something else entirely. They saw promise, range, potential. Peck earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, standing beside Hollywood legends just a year after leaving the stage. 20th Century Fox had found its new star, and they immediately set out to perfect his public image. With the war still raging, fans questioned why such a strong young man wasn't serving overseas. The real reason, that he'd injured his back in a dance class, didn't fit the rugged, masculine persona Fox wanted. So the studio rewrote his story, claiming he'd been hurt while rowing. Tougher, cleaner, more heroic. With that image polished, Peck kept climbing. In 1945, he accepted a role in Spellbound, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, starring opposite Ingrid Bergman. Working with Hitchcock sounded like a dream, but the set told a different story. The director kept his distance, cold and unengaged. Peck later learned that Hitchcock had originally wanted Cary Grant for the role and never fully got over losing him. Still new in Hollywood, Peck forced himself to push past the tension, relying on Ingrid Bergman's warmth and professionalism just to get through each day. Then something unexpected happened. Producer David O. Selznick noticed a strange pattern during early test screenings. Women in the audience whispered, giggled, and practically burst with excitement every time Peck appeared on screen. The noise grew so loud that men began shushing them. Soon the reaction became even more incredible. Women started reacting before he even showed up. Simply seeing his name in the credits was enough to set them buzzing. Spellbound earned 6 Academy Award nominations, but Peck walked away with something even more valuable, undeniable star power. And he learned quickly how to wield it. After appearing in The Warm, Heartfelt The Yearling, he swung in the complete opposite direction with Duel in the Sun in 1946, a film so heated and provocative that audiences nicknamed it Lust in the Dust. Some critics condemned it as immoral. Some cities banned it entirely. It was the kind of movie that could have destroyed a career if handled carelessly. But instead of retreating from the controversy, Gregory Peck pushed forward, ready for the next challenge, the next risk, the next leap that could define his legacy. Peck's hidden emotional battles. Right after World War II, Gregory entered a Hollywood charged with paranoia. Fear of communism spread like wildfire, and soon actors, writers, and directors found themselves under suspicion. Rising from that fear came the House Committee on Un-American Activities, WAC, a group determined to expose anyone they believed posed a communist threat. It didn't take long for the whole operation to look less like national security and more like a political witch hunt. Careers collapsed, reputations shattered, and silence became the safest path for most people. But Peck wasn't built for silence. He believed the committee had crossed the line, acting in ways that violated the very American values they claimed to protect. So he made an incredibly dangerous choice. He signed a public letter condemning WAC, fully aware he might be trading his Hollywood future for integrity. That boldness shaped the next chapter of his career. Fresh from his political stand, Peck was eager to redefine himself as more than the handsome heartthrob audiences adored after Duel in the Sun. In 1947, he accepted a role in Gentleman's Agreement, a film that confronted anti-Semitism directly. He portrayed a journalist who pretends to be Jewish, experiencing discrimination firsthand so audiences could see the ugliness of prejudice through his eyes. The film became a sensation, earning 8 Oscar nominations and securing Peck another Best Actor nod. He wasn't just a star anymore. He was a voice. Still, Peck wasn't someone who confined himself to rules, even his own. After speaking out against anti-communist hysteria, he surprised everyone by playing a Russian in the 1949 film The Great Sinner. It could have sparked backlash, but instead it gave him something priceless, the beginning of one of Hollywood's most enduring friendships. During the film, he bonded with Ava Gardner, and their connection lasted more than 40 years. Peck later described her as his favorite co-star. That friendship left the world puzzled when Gardner passed away at 67. Her death devastated him, and in his grief he made a deeply human, unconventional gesture. He took in her dog and her longtime housekeeper. Not jewelry, not heirlooms, but the living, breathing pieces of her everyday life. Soon after, Peck moved into a lighter world, comedy. Roman Holiday, released in 1953. Even though he was the established star, all eyes were on Audrey Hepburn. Everyone on set, Peck included, could see she was about to become a global sensation. Cary Grant had already turned down the film, unwilling to play second lead. Peck didn't mind. What bothered him was the billing. His name was above the title, hers below. Peck pulled his agent aside and insisted that Hepburn deserved shared title placement. His name stayed first, but the gesture revealed something important. He recognized her brilliance long before the world had caught up. After the film's success, many assumed Peck took a break somewhere on a beach, enjoying the triumph. Instead, he found a different escape. The U.S. tax rate for major stars was brutal, so he discovered a loophole. Working overseas meant keeping more of his earnings. That loophole carried him across the globe to sets in the UK, Germany, and Sri Lanka. It wasn't relaxation, but it was strategic freedom, a vacation from Uncle Sam rather than the sun. What he didn't expect was the bonus. His international reputation skyrocketed. Critics across Europe took notice, and in 1954 the UK even created a new award category for foreign stars. Peck was a top contender, but when the results came in, he placed third. And to a man used to living in the spotlight, third didn't feel triumphant. But sometimes the real reward isn't a trophy. It's quieter, deeper, more lasting. Because somewhere in those years abroad, in the countries, the films, the friendships scattered around the world, Gregory Peck earned something far more meaningful than first place. He became #1 in someone's heart. That Peck's first marriage to Greta Kukkonen had been fading long before it officially ended. They stayed under the same roof mostly for their children, maintaining appearances even though the marriage itself had already gone hollow. But then everything changed when he met a young French reporter named Véronique Passani, a spark that would redirect the path of his life. The year was 1952. Peck was on his way to Rome to begin filming Roman Holiday, one of the defining films of his career. Before he reached the set, Paramount asked him to stop in Paris for an interview with the major French newspaper France Soir. He agreed without giving it much thought, unaware that the woman seated across from him during that interview would become far more than just a journalist with a notebook. From their very first meeting, something sparked between Peck and Véronique Passani. He later admitted that he was instantly captivated, drawn to her intelligence, confidence, and sharp wit. Pawnee, in turn, found herself charmed by his humility, calm demeanor, and ease of conversation. Though their meeting ended politely, as any professional encounter should, neither could forget the other. It was as if a door had opened, though the destination remained unseen to AT that time. Peek and Greta Kukkonen were already living separate emotional lives. When Greta finally asked for a divorce, the blow struck him harder than anticipated. Seeking solace, his thoughts wandered back to Paris and Veronique. By then, she had moved to the Paris press, building a career of her own. Peek reached out, and they met again, sharing lunch, then an entire afternoon at the racetrack talking instead of watching the horses. That first meeting quickly turned into many. Throughout the lengthy divorce proceedings, Peek continued seeing Veronique, and by the time his 14-year marriage officially ended, their relationship had only deepened. On December 30th, 1955, a judge finalized the divorce. The very next day, December 31st, Peek married Veronique Passani in Santa Barbara, California. He was 16 years older, she was 23, and neither seemed to mind. Their partnership would endure for the rest of his life. Back in America, Peek embraced both his family and career with renewed energy. He adored Veronique and cherished the quiet moments they shared between films. He often spoke of what had drawn him to her bright, expressive eyes, warmth, intelligence, and sense of humor. She became his anchor, the part of himself he had long been missing. Soon after their marriage, Peek returned to work with the man in the gray flannel suit, reuniting with Duel in The Sun co-star Jennifer Jones. The set, however, was far from friendly. Rumors suggested lingering tension from their previous collaboration. During heated argument scenes, Jones reportedly clawed at his face, prompting Peek to confront the director, insisting that personal attacks were being disguised as acting. Yet, even this discomfort was minor compared to what awaited him next. In 1956 came Moby Dick, a film that demanded everything from him. Director John Huston pushed Peek into the role of Captain Ahab, a character driven by obsession and madness, far from the calm moral figures for which he was known. The role was physically dangerous. He nearly drowned twice, battling both the ocean and the consuming character. When the film premiered, critics were divided. Peek's restrained style clashed with Ahab's wild fury, and Moby Dick ultimately failed commercially. Yet the project revealed something deeper about him. Fame had not healed the wounds of his childhood. In Gary Fishgall's biography, Peek reflected on a home devoid of warmth, of ordinary family conversations most people take for granted. He learned early to lock away his emotions, presenting a polished, agreeable exterior while loneliness and self-doubt simmered beneath the surface. That emotional distance persisted into adulthood, affecting friendships and professional relationships alike. During filming, Peek and Huston seemed to forge a genuine bond, sharing plans, investing in horses, dreaming of future projects. Then, without warning, Peek withdrew completely. Huston was stunned and hurt, unsure of what he had done. The truth was painful. Peek had not been Huston's first choice for Captain Ahab. Orson Welles had been intended for the role, and Peek was chosen primarily to secure studio backing. For most actors, this might have been disappointing, but for Peek, molded by childhood betrayal and abandonment, it felt like history repeating itself. Quietly, he distanced himself from Huston, closing that door permanently. Peck's personal sacrifice for the spotlight. The early 1960s marked a turning point in Gregory Peck's career, as if someone had hit a reset button. He entered the decade with force, beginning with the tense thriller Cape Fear in 1961. But the momentum didn't stop there. The next role would define his legacy, To Kill a Mockingbird. Critics praised it, audiences embraced it, and history cemented it as his iconic performance. The film swept awards, and Peck won the Best Actor Oscar for portraying Atticus Finch, a hero without superpowers, costume, or dramatic flourish, defined by quiet strength and unwavering principle. Years later, the American Film Institute named Finch the greatest movie hero of the previous century. Behind that acclaimed performance lay a surprising detail. Before accepting the role, Peck requested more focus on Atticus. Harper Lee's novel centered on the children, but Peck believed the story should weigh more on the father. While it might have seemed self-serving, the adjustment enhanced the film, making it sharper, more grounded, and undeniably powerful. Audiences viewed Peck as a Hollywood icon, calm, dignified, and untainted by scandal. Yet life offers no immunity from heartbreak. In 1975, he endured what no parent should: the suicide of his son Jonathan. Jonathan had everything ahead of him: looks, intelligence, kindness, and deep compassion. After college, he joined the Peace Corps in Tanzania, later working in media in California. Despite a life of discipline and focus, hidden struggles weighed on him. One summer evening, after a day of hope, Jonathan ended his life at 31. At the time, Peck was living in France, receiving the devastating news across the ocean. According to Michael Freeland's biography, Peck had always been close to his children, supporting Jonathan through hardships, offering financial help, and urging therapy. Still, Jonathan's death left Peck with lifelong regret. He believed that had he been in Los Angeles that night, Jonathan might have reached out to him as he often did when life felt unbearable. His wife Veronique later described his grief as crushing, shaking him to the core. He questioned himself constantly, as a father and as a man. Family, however, remained his anchor, even amid unbearable pain. Tragedy did not end there. His youngest son, Anthony, battled drug addiction, sabotaging opportunities and relationships, including a failed marriage to supermodel Cheryl Tiegs. Alcohol worsened the spiral, and there was real fear he might follow Jonathan's path. The shadow of loss hung over the household. The aftermath forced Peck to step away from acting for 2 years, returning only when he could reconcile his public life with the weight of private grief. The final years and legacy of Gregory Peck. Peck is remembered as the polished, noble figure of classic Hollywood, admired for grace and integrity. Yet behind that immaculate image lay hidden truths. In 1945, during filming of Spellbound, he found himself caught in a forbidden love with co-star Ingrid Bergman, a deep, immediate connection kept secret for years. Decades later, he acknowledged the relationship, describing her as a lovely Swedish rose, admitting that he had truly loved her and leaving it at that. Over decades, he became a monument in cinema history, collecting awards, acclaim, and adoration. In June 2003, at 87, he passed away peacefully, Veronique holding his hand. News of his death spread worldwide. Nearly 3,000 people attended his public memorial, ushered in with the password Atticus, honoring the role that immortalized him. Hollywood's golden era seemed to close with his passing. Frank Pearson, president of the Academy, called him the last of the true aristocrats of that era, while Jack Valenti praised his films for revealing profound truths about character. The American Film Institute pledged to preserve his work as a treasure of cinema history. Yet Peck's impact went beyond the screen. He advocated for peace, supported cancer research, and spoke up when principles demanded it, never seeking praise. His life was one of brilliance and complexity, admired for integrity, yet deeply human, capable of love, loss, and compassion. Gregory Peck lived boldly, worked passionately, and left a legacy that continues to shine long after the curtain fell on his final scene.